Britain's nuclear power programme comes under the Department of Energy. Secretary of State for Energy is Tony Benn.
Well, I was put in charge of it first in 1966, and that was the Ministry of Technology. And the general argument was the nuclear power was cheap, it was safe, and it was peaceful. And that was the basis on which the government of which I was a member, and I was responsible for it, based their argument. What I learned by experience there, because I was in charge of nuclear power for, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years, I learned that all the arguments for civil nuclear power were wrong. Well, I had read a book which described an atomic bomb. I read it during the war, and it was just at that time just a sort of imaginary story. And then I was in the Navy, and I remember standing in the mess at lunchtime and hearing on the news that an atomic bomb had been dropped at Hiroshima. So then, in 1955, when Eisenhower made his speech about atoms for peace, having been brought up on the Bible, I thought this is the classic case of swords into plowshares. And I became very enthusiastic about it and thought it was wonderful, it would solve the world's problems. But at that time, at the beginning, I did not realize, and I learned by experience as the minister in charge of the industry, these three things: it wasn't cheap, it wasn't safe, and it wasn't peaceful. And that was why my opinion shifted. If you take the cost, you see, the cost of nuclear power as presented never included the research that was done. And that's pretty expensive. Much of it military research. It was allegedly applied to civil purposes. But the really big cost was disposal of nuclear waste, and no thought was given to that. Indeed, even today, they haven't found a totally satisfactory answer. Then, was it safe? Well, if you take the experience, I don't know where you start. Kistin in Russia, there was a reprocessing plant, and there was a very, very serious accident there. Then there was 3 Mile Island, where, you know, the whole station went down. Then there was Windscale. Now, that's another example. There was a very big fire at Windscale. I was never told. I discovered when I went to Japan, I was talking to the Japanese minister, and he said to me, how are you getting on with dealing with the consequences of the fire? And I said to my officials, what fire? Oh, we didn't want to bother you, Minister. It was before you became Secretary of Minister. And so, gradually, I just lost confidence in the nuclear industry.
Big Ben wants close! Hey, you've been a gas there!
Wednesday, you've got to pay that gas bill.
There are very deep-seated problems here. These were brought home to me very forcibly by the people I spoke to, but I'm obviously hopeful about the outcome, and certainly there is no safety problem which would prevent the negotiations from going on in the way in which I suggest over the weekend.
The strike at Windscale was an important one. Industrial disputes are important, but because of the nature of the danger created if there was industrial action in a nuclear plant, I was told I'd have to send the troops in. Well, sending troops in to deal with an industrial dispute was not my opinion of how government should behave. So I went up to, and I spent time with them, and I talked to them, and it was resolved in the end. But it was another very interesting example. So dangerous is this material that the normal rights of trade unions would have to be suspended for reasons of public safety. And that was a very interesting event for me. The question of cancer risk was inherent in the whole question of nuclear activity. I'll give you one example of that. I had a trade union official come to me and he said, I have a member who worked in Windscale and he has developed cancer and he wants to claim. So I looked at it very carefully. I said, right, okay, I agree. Oh, the whole of Whitehall was up in arms. I called a meeting, and this was about one guy's compensation. And the Chief Medical Advisor of the Ministry of Defence was there, the Chief Medical Advisor of the Ministry of Pensions was there, and what they didn't want was any provable link between nuclear activity and health. My feeling about nuclear power is very closely with my feeling about open government. I think I can say I was the only person who put one decision to the House of Commons on a vote, the question of using Windscale for reprocessing nuclear waste, and they voted upon it. It was an open discussion, whereas all the other nuclear decisions were so secret they didn't want anyone to know.
Nobody denied that there are hazards in nuclear power, just as there are hazards in mining, hazards in oil, hazards in a lot of life, aspects of life. But at least when we examined it, members of Parliament as a whole agreed that these factors were not sufficient to rule out the role of nuclear power and Windscale's part in it, and I share that view myself.
But I did authorise power stations, and it wasn't until later that my conclusion that it was just a quite unacceptable source of energy came. I mean, you learn by experience. And then the final information was after I'd left office. Without telling me, I discovered the plutonium from our civil power stations had gone to America for their weapons program. So every Atoms for Peace power station was a bomb factory for America. And when I heard that, that really was just, I was so shocked by that. To have advocated it innocently and then discover what it was really used for was such an outrage. I mean, I misled the public innocently about a central question, and I was responsible for misleading them, and I wasn't told the truth. I think the weapons consideration has always been an underlying one, and nothing should be allowed to happen that deprived them of the material they needed for the weapons, or indeed undermine public confidence in nuclear power. So that's the story, from Hiroshima to Atoms for Peace, from that to my responsibility. Cheap, safe and peaceful wasn't true in any case, and finally being told that it was about the American weapons program. I mean, that just, anybody in my position would be shocked by that, but all I've done is to say it many times and whenever I have the opportunity. And funnily enough, if you do make a mistake, you get a certain credit for it. The important thing is, why did you change your mind? Candidly, I feel I was betrayed by not being informed of this at the time. And one of the problems in the whole nuclear field is that you cannot rely on being told the truth, and even ministers cannot always find out what is going on. And I think people ought to know. I've always believed that openness in this area was the most important thing of all. Otherwise, we lose all democratic control.